All right. So my name is Jessica Voveris. I'm currently a meteorologist with the 14th Weather Squadron in the Air Force in Asheville, North Carolina, and I'm here with Jaret Rogers, who's a science operations officer at Boise, Idaho, and he's going to be talking a little bit about applying for jobs outside of college.
Yeah, my name is Jaret Rogers. I'm currently the Science and Operations Officer in Boise, Idaho. Been here about 2 years. Previous to that, I worked at the Phoenix, Arizona office and also at the Storm Prediction Center for 7 years as a forecaster.
All right. So I'm going to hit you with a couple of questions, Jaret. First question, what would make me stand out during the application process?
So I know as a new graduate or somebody starting your career, the application process can be pretty daunting. The first things first, you want to make sure you're meeting those basic standards for the job you're applying for, whether it's the academic background, accomplishments, skills that you can list that show that you're qualified for that position specifically. But beyond that, I think there's a lot of the intangible skills you can focus on to like really make yourself stand out. Some of those I would say are like passion, personality, interpersonal skills. I like to see who you are as a person, not just as somebody who can do the job itself. In a lot of environments, especially in government meteorology, you're going to be working pretty closely with these people potentially for years to come. So if you're not a good fit with your personality or interpersonal skills, or you just don't feel like you're going to fit in with the team culture that you're joining, then you're probably not going to get the job. But you need to really demonstrate that as much as you can either through your application, your resume, and especially during the interview. I think those are important. But beyond that, I think leadership skills show areas you've gone above and beyond in, beyond just like your basic education. If you've led groups, teams, extracurricular activities, even like sports, things you've been involved in your personal life, just anything that can show who you are as a person outside of the job. You really want to paint yourself the full picture possible. One thing I like to tell people is you're really telling a story about who you are as a person. So that doesn't mean I'm good at computer programming. Like, yes, that's one little skill you have, but that doesn't really define you as a person. So just think of that with that mindset, how you're going to tell a story about yourself. And then finally, showing the ability to overcome challenges. you know, th- if you faced a difficult time in your life, and that can be anything from like a really obvious challenge, say, you had a hard time financially getting into school or something like that, or just even smaller challenges in life that kind of took you off guard and you overcame those to be successful. I think that speaks a lot about your character. And I think that will really make you stand out during the application process.
Question two. So, based on my experience level and earned degree, what positions would I better qualify for? And the goal is to kind of address the GS relation or the GS levels in relation to the degree earned, and then like any possible research or internship experience on the side.
Yeah, a lot of this depends on what organization you're getting into. So I can speak mostly from the National Weather Service perspective. The typical first job that most people take is an entry level meteorologist job or something, a lower grade at a headquarters type job or something like that. There are a lot of different avenues you can take within the Weather Service beyond just forecast offices. So that's something to keep in mind. But really, I think just try to be creative. There's no one track that people take throughout their career. Out of all the people that I know, I would say very few of them have, the exact same career path where they started in a forecast office and progressed upwards in that direction. I think even now, like with the way things are changing, that's becoming even more the case where people kind of deviate off that typical path and take different positions and then, maybe eventually end up in the position that they want. Another thing to keep in mind is that, if you have a PhD, graduate schools, but especially PhD, can open up more opportunities for your entry level job, especially right off the bat. That opens up like national lab or research type positions, some headquarters positions that might be make you more attractive as a candidate. But really, it's just depends on your experience level and skill set that can enhance your opportunities right out of college. You have to really be intentional about defining what those are and making sure that the position you're applying for and the hiring officials for that understand like who you are and what you can bring to the position to make sure you can get that. But I certainly I guess my approach to this is not to sell yourself short, and maybe aim even a little higher than you're comfortable with, because I think you'd be surprised how many people don't apply for things that maybe they don't feel comfortable with, and that almost narrows down the competition by itself. So, just being a little bit more bold and a little bit more confident than you might be comfortable with can really pay off in the long run. But outside the Weather Service, I think all that advice still applies. But really, one thing that I would encourage people to do is just reach out to professionals, even if you don't know them. I think you'd be surprised how many people are willing to help you, and cast a wide net. If you reach out to one person, the odds, I don't know if they'll be in your favor, whether that person or not will respond. But if you reach out to 10 people, maybe one or two do respond. And I think you'll find, at least a couple people that would be really motivated and really willing to help, because a lot of people, in our field, and a lot of professionals really like to pay it forward, because every one of us has been there before. We know the challenges, how intimidating it can be. And I think just seeing someone who's really motivated and passionate and willing to kind of go out on a limb to contact someone like a professional, I think that speaks volumes, and I think would really help strengthen your credibility in the field.
Are there positions that have specific wording that are like we encourage, like recent graduates are encouraged to apply kind of positions that really I should be focusing on as a recent graduate?
Yeah, to be honest, I don't know if that specific wording's attached in the announcements, and I think that's, I'm going to be honest here. Like, one of the challenges with some government positions is that if you look at the wording in the job advertisement, it's not very clear what they're looking for. I even experienced this at my level, being in the Weather Service for a long time. So you have to really read carefully. Sometimes they might throw in some verbiage like that, saying that it's more entry level. But at other times, you kind of have to just read between the lines with what's listed in the advertisement. So it can be challenging, a little bit daunting, even for mid-career professionals like myself. But in general, if you're not sure, usually they have a contact person at the bottom. You can reach out there. Or if you have a little more knowledge about what position that is, you could reach out to somebody in the organization, and they might be able to help you. Even our board here, the Board of Operational Government Meteorologists, I think we have a pretty diverse group here from all across government meteorology, and just reaching out to us, I think we would easily be able to find somebody who can point you in the right direction.
Sometimes folks have experience as a researcher in the university, especially at the graduate level, that sometimes comes across as unpaid, and there's maybe a concern that that isn't a qualification that's highly desirable. But how could that be used to make me as a candidate, as a recent graduate, competitive in that market?
Yeah, so the first thing I would say is the fact that it's unpaid, in my opinion at least, does not change anything. Whether it's a paid, unpaid experience. In fact, in some ways, it shows that you're extra motivated, willing to go above and beyond. So I certainly would list all those experiences that you have on your resume, and make sure you're highlighting them, right? Don't just bury them in your resume. But really, anything you can show that demonstrates how you go above and beyond, how you're motivated, willing to take risks, maybe try new things. I think all of those speak volumes on an application. Like I said, you gotta make yourself stand out. You got to tell a story with your application. For instance, like we have a program called Pathways, where students apply from all over the country for a temporary internship at our office and other Weather Service offices. I would say about half the applications look identical, and it's like, how do you distinguish between application A and B? Like, which person stands out more? A lot of times it's really difficult, and it's just human nature. You got to like sort and group people based on what information you're getting. And there's certain things that will make them stand out. It's like, well, these two applications have all the same academic achievements. Let's say they have a high GPA, good schools, good program, things like that. But this application actually showed that they were involved in this research project that's pretty unique, and I think innovative, and really shows something beyond just the basic accomplishments that most people already have. So definitely highlight those types of activities. And again, you want to show yourself as a whole person, not just, I'm a student, I did well in school, and now I'm applying for a job. It's like, that's like the lowest common denominator, in my opinion.
What are some of the differences in the hiring practices on the government side versus the private sector?
That's a great question. I would say the government side, for better or for worse, is a little more rigid. There's a lot of rules, regulations, and in some cases laws that have to be followed throughout the hiring process. So it's going to look a little different than the private sector. And I have some experience, in the past applying for private sector jobs as well as being on the government side. So at least got a taste of what that's like. I would say one tangible difference is the resume. I think in the private sector, you'll find the advice that you keep it short, 1 to 2 pages, and just very pithy in general, would apply for most private sector jobs. And the government, they want to see, for better for worse, again, uh, a lot of specific items related to the position you're applying for, and some of that's at the HR level where they're trying to determine if you're actually qualified for the position, but they also want to see your work experience, help determine what salary or what grade level you qualify for. So there's a lot of like background information that they're seeking from your resume. So you have to be very careful looking at that. And I know this board here, the operational government meteorologist, has put together some information in the past about how to fill out applications for government jobs. So I definitely would recommend looking at those. The interview process would look different too. I don't know how it is outside the Weather Service, but in the Weather Service, thankfully, they've moved on from just strict phone interviews for the most part. Now it's more virtual meetings, Google Meet or something like that, Zoom. Um, so the interview process has gotten a little more flexible and I would say modernized, where you can actually have more of a face-to-face virtual interaction. Um, but I know that depending on what you're applying for, and again, this changes depending on the job and the organization you're applying for, but it may still be kind of rigid in the sense where you get like a 1 hour block and that's your interview, right? There might be some other components to the application, like a written portion to the interview, things like that. But in general, it's going to follow the same overall format. The private sector, at least in my opinion, that could vary wildly depending on where you're applying for, what position you're applying for, what level. I've heard in some cases, some of the bigger companies, they actually have full day interviews, like 8 hours worth of interviews in the final round. Sometimes they fly you there in person. Sometimes they do it virtually. They may have 4 or 5 rounds to the interview process as well. So um, again, it could vary wildly in the private sector. Another thing I've noticed is private companies a lot of times use recruiters as basically your focal point for guiding you through the application process. The government definitely does not have that. If there's any person that would function as a recruiter, it might just be a contact you have informally through the agency or something like that. But um, yeah, some of the bigger companies definitely use recruiters and rely on them heavily to explain the process. And if you have any questions, you go through that person rather than directly with the hiring official. And then finally, I think on the government side, the way veterans preference works, it's much more ingrained in the culture. So if you're a veteran, in some of these positions, you're going to get moved to the top or towards the top of the pile for applying for jobs. Where in the private sector, that's not necessarily the case. So um, a lot of differences. I think it's probably a little more similar than it used to be. Luckily, again, the government side has modernized a little bit and using more virtual meetings and things like that for the interview process.
And another quick question on the resume side.
Mhm.
So I'm sure folks on USA Jobs see this option for a tailored resume through USA Jobs, like building a
Mhm.
resume through USA Jobs. What's your kind of advice on that?
Yeah, I think it can be useful in some cases. The best use of that is for making sure all the requirements are met. So if you look through the job announcement for what you're applying for, and a lot of them are going to look similar, especially in the Weather Service, they're going to ask you for very specific information about your work history. How many hours a week did you work? I think it's even like a civil service question or a selective service, I should say. Sorry. Um, Grade level, salary, education, things like that. And it's very specific the way you have to put it on your resume. If you're applying for the first time through the Weather Service, like that's pretty nerve wracking in my opinion. Even at the mid career level, if you're already in, I've heard several examples of people making mistakes there by not using the custom resume that's provided in USA Jobs. However, I think it does kind of limit you for what you can show about your personality, your accomplishments, experiences, and things like that. So one recommendation that I kind of see actually, I'm seeing more and more, but you see this more with people who understand how the weather service and government meteorology works, is you might actually have two resumes. So your official resume may be that template that's provided just to make sure you get through the initial filter at the HR level, and then you might attach like your own creative resume. And as a hiring official, I would, I think I would understand what you're trying to show here, because I think every hiring official understands the challenges of just making sure that you meet those requirements and get through that initial HR filter. But I do like to see the more creative side. So if I saw both of those resumes, I definitely would start looking at the one that's attached as well. So I guess to answer that question, it's useful. It can be a little bit of a risk if you don't use it, but I also think that it's good to show your creative side by coming up with your own resume.
How can I practice my interview skills and where can I learn to better write my resume? So, as a student, like what are some tips I can do to or use to tailor my resume to make me the most ideal candidate?
The number one tip I would give is to practice a lot with a friend, a family member, a mentor, basically anybody you can think of that's willing to listen and work with you. Um, because it's not natural for most people, depending on your personality type, to talk about yourself. And some people may consider it bragging, right? It's like, wow, look at all these things I've accomplished and my experience. You should hire me. I'm a great person for this position. But you got to get comfortable talking about yourself in that respect, because it's not natural for most people. So practice is number one. I think asking people you're close with for their resume if they're willing to share it with you. I've done that a lot. It's kind of uncomfortable, unless you know the person well, but just kind of establish like, hey, we're both kind of in the same boat. Are you willing to share your resume? I'll share mine with you, and we can learn from each other. And I've done that with probably 5 or 10 friends over the years, and I've seen their resume, and I know what they've accomplished, and they're comfortable sharing that. But it helps both people because it allows you to get some ideas. Hey, maybe I can steal an idea or two from your resume, but I also can provide them feedback too. Like, hey, I think maybe reword this. This was a little confusing, or this didn't make sense to me, or maybe you forgot to add something that I know about you that you didn't list that I think would be great. So, getting that feedback, just reaching out beyond yourself, I think is something definitely you should do. And there's also lots of tips online. Use those resources that are available to you, even like less formal resources like YouTube, Reddit, things like that, where people just share their advice, can be incredibly useful.
Well, thank you so much, Jaret. This has been great. A lot of good answers, a lot of good tips, and hopefully this helps all those students incoming into the job network.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think I totally understand how intimidating the whole process can be, and it still is, even after working in my career for 10 plus years. So I would encourage anybody who has questions to reach out to any of the members of the board of operational government meteorology. I think we're all very passionate about helping people succeed in their careers. So I appreciate you taking the time to talk to me.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thanks.